We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to email us directly at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want you to know that your messages are likely to be heard, addressed, and listened to on air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
Hello, everyone. This is Operation Truth. With me, as always, is Tom Fuentes, my colleague, my co-host, and even my co-conspirator. Tom, as I've mentioned to you on numerous occasions, has had quite a distinguished career in servicing our country. He was approximately 30 years in the FBI, was in charge of their entire international operation, which I believe is either 60 or 80 field officers coordinating that effort abroad. Was on the board of directors of Interpol, even though last time he chastised me, I told him I couldn't read. He needed to send it to me in an audio. So it's a form of an affirmative defense. I may. He was also in charge of organized crime. He's had an incredibly distinguished career and a commitment to keeping this country safe. And as you probably have all heard before, we've had a couple of former senior executives from the FBI. One gentleman, Chris Schwecker, another gentleman, Kevin Brock, both former assistant directors as well. They have actually been architects of a letter that was submitted to the Congress because of their grave concern over the safety of this nation. I don't think there's any question that we have a problem here. And I think it's further supported by the fact that if you listen to what's transpiring in many of our major cities, like New York, Chicago, Boston, Denver, cities in Vermont and Maine, these are both bordering states. Ironically, Vermont is a sanctuary state. We're all starting to feel the influx or the byproduct of this influx of migrants illegally accessing our country, which I remind you, which is critically important, never to forget. We do not have a mechanism in place that would allow us to vet them. And the reason is a very simple reason. Many of the countries that they come from, and Tom can speak to this and verify what I'm about to say, they don't have databases. They don't have a tendency to share information when they do have information. And they change their identity like you change your underwear once a day. Passports, driver's license, birth certificates. This border problem is going to redefine this country. This is something I spoke about on a number of occasions, starting at the beginning of this podcast exercise of mine when it was between the lines. And it's come to fruition. Earlier, I wasn't really saying it jokingly, but Governor Abbott, the state of Texas, has brought it home to this whole country exactly what they're experiencing. And suddenly we don't like it. A bus full of migrants was sent to Martha's Vineyard, and we pulled out the National Guard and automatically began a plan to deport them from Martha's Vineyard. You know, the truth is the truth. It's unavoidable, and it is what it is. And the remedy to this is to fix this problem. We recently witnessed approximately, as I understand it, 500 to 600 illegal immigrants storm a border location in El Paso, Texas, literally assaulting our Border Patrol agents or police or National Guard, whoever was in their way. You know, I hate to bring this up, and I bring it up reluctantly because I don't want this to reflect as to a mentality that we may have on this show. But at what point do we use force and certain levels of force to repel a foreign invader of this type? Number one, and then I'm referencing specifically deadly physical force. But even independent of that part of the conversation, why wasn't there gas deployed, tear gas, to disperse or deter them? Nothing was done. We watched them eventually push past our National Guard at the border of El Paso. I know, Tom, you witnessed the same thing, and I know that you speak frequently to some of the former agents, gentlemen that really made the FBI what it was. I think probably the best it ever was. You know, and I don't want to say anything disparaging about J. Edgar Hoover, but he had his own manner in which he operated the FBI. I think the men of your generation brought a level of integrity, education, you know, wisdom that had never been experienced before. And I like to believe that the agency would continue with that, although I know we're not going to be able to say that today on air because it's not true. But to go back to this whole border issue, Tom, we're looking at the border in El Paso. Our National Guard are being overrun. The borders in general in Jocumba and San Ysidro in California, people just walking into the country. We have Haiti now doing this. And, you know, Tom and I weren't jokingly discussing this last night, but it did come up in conversation that Haiti's been in disarray for generations. But Tom, what's the end game here? I mean, where are we going with this whole scenario?
Well, Lou, it depends on who you mean by we. If you're talking we being the United States, then it's going to go wherever our leadership takes us at the moment. So if you're looking at, you know, the problem, you see police deployed. You see whether it's a riot or a huge demonstration in one of our big cities like a New York or a Chicago, and then you see the police out there not even equipped, not wearing helmets or bulletproof vests or, you know, even having nightsticks. They're out there like they're watching a baseball game or something, and they're not equipped to engage in a physical confrontation with whoever the protesters are. Now, I could tell you in the mid-1970s, I was a police officer in Northern Illinois, and the Nazi Party sought to march in Skokie, Illinois, which was predominantly Jewish, and many of them were survivors of the Holocaust. And the city of Skokie said, no, can't march here. No permit to have a parade or assemble or anything. And so at that time, the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, took the case on, and it went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically ruled that the cities could control how the demonstration went. They could say when, where, a certain park, a certain parking lot, something like that, but that the city had to ensure the ability of the protest group to have a protest, to assemble, to speak, and to express their views. Now, they control it and say, okay, you don't get to march 24 hours a day. You don't get to take over bridges and facilities, but they were ordered that they could have specific locations. So as a young expendable police officer, I was part of a group of a couple hundred police officers from various jurisdictions in Northern Illinois that were assigned to protect the Nazis so that they could express their opinions and have freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. Now, what happened is that different cities took place outside of Chicago and then later in Chicago, made the decision that, okay, they can be here this coming Saturday night. And then in the next town, the next Saturday night, they couldn't march every single day. They couldn't march anywhere they pleased. It was specified. And police officers like me at the time, with only a plastic helmet, we didn't have the bulletproof vests. We had nightsticks. That was it. And we were out there to keep the Nazis safe. Now, the first couple of those demonstrations, people showed up to protest the Nazis' ability to speak. So you had a number, and then the media showed up to see that. So you had a number of protesters show up, and then we were separating the Nazis from the protesters that showed up. Now, the protesters showed up armed with fruit, you know, tomatoes and various types of fruit. And unfortunately, when they threw that debris at the Nazis, none of them were Major League Baseball pitchers. So the stuff that they threw at the Nazis landed short by about 10 yards and landed on us. And so the first day, but, you know, after they threw their batch of fruit, listened to the Nazis a few minutes, then it dispersed for the day. So there was no real violence. There was no real altercations. Now, the next Saturday, they were in a different city, fewer media, fewer protesters, about the same number of police officers, and the same number of Nazis. Each week, for about 3 or 4 consecutive weeks, the crowd dwindled, the media dwindled, and then the protesters that came out to throw stuff at the Nazis apparently ran out of fruit or something. They stopped showing up because they realized they weren't going to get to go hands on hand and fight with the Nazis. So the net result was that they, even though they were able to schedule protests that whole summer, week after week, after about 3 or 4 weeks, the rest of them were canceled. That was the end of that.
You know what's interesting about that, Tom? Is we protected their constitutional right
Exactly
to lawfully assemble, which could bump us right into this whole TikTok discussion that we're not quite ready to go to, but we will talk about this, Tom, because you and I spoke about this earlier. We won't get into it right this second, but it is about censorship that's going on with this government. Maybe one of the most serious forms of censorship, Tom, is being carried out by the media because they selectively report. And any way you look at it, we're censoring issues or activities that are going on in this country that everybody should know about, regardless of your political ideology. I think.
But at that time, the censorship was the city of Skokie. Now, Skokie is, I don't know, 50 miles north of Chicago, Illinois, but it has an enormous percentage-wise Jewish population. And at that time, this is only, 20 years after the end of World War II. Many of the people in the Skokie community survived the Holocaust in Germany and Poland and the nearby locations of concentration camps. They survived, or members of their family survived, or members of their family did not survive. So everybody, a large percentage of the population of Skokie was very affected by the Holocaust during World War II. And Skokie said, we cannot have the Nazis, the American Nazi, in their full Nazi uniform, armbands, flags, everything, marching down the main streets of Skokie, saying they're pro-Nazi, because it would be so offensive and so damaging to the people that survived the Holocaust that the city didn't want that. They wanted to protect them. Supreme Court basically came back on their opinion and said, no, you have to allow them the ability to speak freely, freedom of assembly, their First Amendment rights, and protect them in those rights. Now, if they get out of hand, that's one thing, but the government has to allow them the ability to speak and have these protests. And so the government could say, based on the Supreme Court decision, okay, between this, 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. at this park on this date, on this Saturday night, you're allowed to assemble nonviolently and speak. And they did. And as I said, as the weeks went by and there less and less people showed up.
Tom, the thing that's important to know here also, because we're talking about American citizens and their right to peacefully assemble and protest, which is protected under the Constitution. So everyone's clear in the country. No such rights exist for people who are illegally attempting to enter the country. They're not protected by any constitutional right.
Well, actually, the Supreme Court on many occasions has ruled if you're on the ground of the United States, you also get the rights. You don't have to be a full citizen. You don't have to have a green card. If you're here, you have certain rights.
Once you've landed, Tom, you're absolutely correct.
Well, yeah, you're not going to have them until you get here, but when you're here, you've got them.
But the process in which you access the country is not protected under any rights. To the contrary, it's a misdemeanor. It's a criminal offense to illegally access this country.
Correct.
And what we're witnessing is this going completely unaddressed, starting with the highest office in the land. They seem to be reluctant for whatever reason, because I still beg the question on a daily basis, who's designed to benefit from 15 million plus people coming into this country illegally that we cannot vet? And by the way, just to add a little sugar to this discussion, we're talking about giving them guns, that illegal people entering the country will be entitled to have firearms. For everyone that doesn't hear this podcast, you have to understand, we keep reminding you, we can't vet them. We know nothing about them. So let's enhance the hilarity attached to this and have them fill out a federal firearms form, more cordially known as a 4473, and not be able to vet them based on they're filling this form out. This just goes, but what I don't understand is, do the Democrats, for example, who support this policy, not realize that this will come back and bite them, their families as well? Do they think if we were to have a terrorist incident in the country that the individual or group that are perpetrating this terrorist incident are going to discern between who's the Democrat who helped them get into the country and who's a Republican who is attempting to block it. I mean, that's what's so out of tune with this. There's a lack of morality, a lack of conscience, a lack of courage. But who benefits from this? And as I've said before on this podcast, they're doing a disservice even to the illegals coming into the country because we have no way to take care of you. Listen to your major cities. According to Eric Adams, we have no more housing available for them. They're sleeping on sidewalks outside of hotels and other locations in New York City in boxes. How did this help them? And this is all part of the master plan to build a new voting base, which is what is being alluded to, or even possibly, as some people say, looking to change the ethnic makeup of the country. Is that what the agenda is?
I think it's more than alluding to. I think they basically are saying it out loud. You hear Senator Dick Durbin, for example, if I could back up a step, this woke policy of the administration has affected the military severely. Normal, aggressive, merit-based young soldiers join the military, know they're going to apply their best skills, work hard, and get promoted up the ranks of the military. Maybe they'll be a general someday. And then what you have is a military that becomes so woke that if you're not transgender and LGBTQ and all of those categories, you're really, as a white male, you're not going to be able to compete with them for promotion. The military, like many other very important agencies, like my beloved FBI, are no longer meritocracy based as they used to be. So being the best doesn't give you the best chance of getting hired or getting promoted within that agency. And so now you have Senator Dick Durbin out of Illinois several weeks ago saying, well, we've got this problem. Everybody's quitting the military, everybody being white males, because they can't get promoted. They can't get ahead. They don't want to have to change their sex to do it. So since the LGBTQ++ community is dominating how you get ahead in the military, much less other agencies, but the military is designed to save our lives as a country. And in that important task, you have the LGBTQ community dictating that we're no longer a meritocracy. We're identity based. If you identify as one of these categories, you've got a better chance than a poor white male who's just trying to be the best he can. And now that's not good enough. We don't want that anymore.
But Tom, these are very valid and important points for people to understand, because this does directly impact our ability to protect the country when we don't have a certain demographic, regardless of which one, unwilling to participate in protecting the country. But this issue with young white males is something that's resonating through the country. They're at a distinct disadvantage because I guess we're trying to embrace a practice of reparation somehow, and in doing so, giving people who are not as qualified, perhaps, opportunities they shouldn't have over people that should. And to make this a very simple conversation, we want the best people leading us. We want the best people working for us, regardless of their ethnicity, their religious denomination, their culture, and their lifestyle. We're looking for the best people.
Well, the best people now might be from China. If you listen to Senator Dick Durbin from my home state of Illinois, which I'm ashamed to say, he several weeks ago made the comment that we can't keep the staffing levels up. We're several tens of thousands short in each military branch. But we've got these illegals from China that we see lined up on the highway, coming in from Colombia, South America, taking buses all the way to the U.S. border, being escorted into the U.S. You see them lined up on the roads in Texas, thousands of them, young, male, military age, no families, no wives, spouses, or children with them. And here's Durbin saying, we could solve a big problem. We could put them in our military. And it's been practiced in the United States that if somebody from another country joins our military and performs well, it's an accelerated path to citizenship. So, that's what he's saying is, we could make these guys all citizens in a couple of years after being soldiers in our military, or sailors or airmen in our military. We'll make them citizens, and then they'll be able to vote. Perfect. Perfect from a democratic standpoint. You build up, you have no more criticism of the military because they have all the staffing they need instead of people quitting. And then you've got these young men suddenly becoming U.S. citizens. And they're so grateful, according to Durbin's philosophy and the other Democrats, they're going to be so grateful, they're going to vote Democratic from now till forever.
That's the theory, Tom. You and I talked about that as well. In fact, it was last evening. I know that that is probably a big part of the agenda that's being driven here. I don't know if it's going to play out that way.
Oh, it's a big gamble. You're right. That's a gamble.
You know, and just so everyone is clear, a lot of people who are accessing this country from countries where socialism exists, Central and South America, they're not coming here to be involved in a socialist society again. And once people figure out what's going on with the Democrats, I don't think it's likely they're going to support that agenda. What's really so interesting is just this lack of morality attached to this and this lack of concern for our young people, because our young people are going to pay for this. We can sit here and talk about it and try to inform everybody, and hopefully we're trying to motivate people to understand they have to get out and vote and educate them on topics. And I remind everyone, we're not here to spoon feed you. We're giving you food for thought. Tom and I encourage you to fact check us. The thing I will tell you about Tom is that he's had so much experience on the front line through his career in the FBI, law enforcement in general, and these assignments that he's had. He has a very clear understanding as to what exactly is driving this country today. We both do. We've had similar life paths, but in some ways we've had different life paths, but we both bumped into the reality of what makes this country operate. It's money driven oftentimes, power hungry. You know, it's all the things that are going to cause this country's demise. And for everybody that's sitting home complacent or indifferent as we speak to, or distracted, guys, if this election doesn't go the right direction in November, this country will be unrecognizable. I think you'll agree with that.
Oh, yeah. And also, you know, from a cultural standpoint, it's not just the military or our law enforcement agencies like the FBI and DEA and the Marshals, ATF, but you see this, our universities, for example. How many universities have dropped the requirement that an applicant take the SAT test? So you have academic tests to measure them against other applicants and say, here, this one is stronger academically than the other one. And they're basically, oh, we don't need that anymore. We'll just go by identity. If you're gay, better shot at getting in. If you're, you know, some other trans, whatever it might be, you're going to get an advantage coming in than if you're just a white person, white male, white female. You're not going to get in.
So let me see if I understand you, Tom. You're suggesting that as we enroll in college, that we tell them we're either gay or trans, and then when we get in, we can go back to our normal life.
Well, but the hope is they don't make you prove it if you're not.
They don't test you.
And the testing might not be good if you're not really who you say.
Interesting point that you brought up, though. Like, if you really want to get into a school, you kind of walk in and tell them you're part of the disenfranchised.
All you need to know is the alphabet. If you can come up with all these letters and plus signs and minus signs, and maybe you have to take a note card with you.
You know, you've given me a lot of food for thought here as to how I'm going to start to pursue things. I'm going to approach people as a different demographic than I really am, and receive all this consideration and these job opportunities. I guess that's a great way to go about it.
Well, it depends who you approach. You hope the other person you're approaching is as woke and goofy as you are if you try to do that.
Well, you know, this is a little bit of a George Santos. That's what he did. He kind of went in and made up a fairy tale about who he was by background and education, et cetera, only to be found out that he wasn't. But it got him the job. And then, of course, he had the timing wrong. You see, as I say semi-jokingly, you don't lie to get the job. After you get the job, then you're licensed to lie your ass off. And you do it with impunity, which is a big part of the problem in the country.
Well, that brings up a whole other terrible situation at the moment. Somehow, you know, he gets fired from being, you know, in Congress. So he's got to leave. That takes a spot. And the timing of it causes the Republicans another, and it's a very thin majority. Now you have several Republicans who say, even in the next couple of weeks, I'm resigning. And depending what state, what time, what the timing of it is, they're very likely to be replaced by a Democrat. And the razor-thin majority of one member or two members right now that Republicans have in the House of Representatives, that may evaporate. And maybe people think, well, what's the big deal? I know a lot of people have no clue of what it means for a party to have the majority in the House and in the Senate. Now, the House in particular, we had how many years of Nancy Pelosi's whatever title, leadership supposedly, but title. And the result of that is the Speaker of the House gets to determine who are the committee chairmen of all the various committees. And what do those committees get to put on their agenda for the investigations or hearings that they're going to conduct? And, when she gets to decide if what they come up with or propose gets put on the floor of the House for the vote of the entire House. So you go down all of these steps, and if the House goes Democrat, after having been slightly Republican right now, country could be screwed because they are the last resort in any event of trying to hold back Biden. So you have a Democratic Senate with the outstanding leadership of Chuck Schumer, as he just demonstrated the last couple of weeks in his speech about overthrowing Netanyahu and Israel.
We'll get to that, Tom.
Yeah, so that's another good topic.
We'll get to that.
But you have the White House, you have the Senate, and you have the House of Representatives. And Biden issuing all these executive orders, which many of which are just flat out illegal or unconstitutional, but he's been getting away with it. And if they come up with crazy laws to pass, and it would be, for example, right now, if the House goes Democratic, what is to prevent making the District of Columbia a new state, Puerto Rico a new state? That would add 4 new Democratic senators, and who knows how many based on Congress, how many congresspersons. So right there, you have the undermining of the House of Representatives for sure, and the Senate. And that alone could help make the Democratic Party a permanent party for at least a generation.
Well, the Democrats, Tom, they're also involved, like for example, in New York, in creating new districts, so they can have seats in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, gerrymandering the districts to benefit them.
Yeah, but look, the bottom line is the American public, they have to get off their hiney and stop worrying about their vacations and their flights.
Well, they may not be worried about any of that. They may be in the position of what are they going to do about it? They may not even know about it. I would say right now with a certain amount of confidence that right this week, as the newest group of Republicans have announced that they're going to leave almost immediately and create what could be, they have to know what the result will be. If they end up, they're the last finger in the dike of stopping the Marxist movement in Congress and in the White House. And if they're gone and it goes Democratic, that's it. There's nothing else to hold back Joe Biden, or depends on who's going to be the president. If Biden gets reelected, or if, who knows, if somebody else, Hillary Clinton comes back, or some of the other people that you're hearing about, Michelle Obama, if she decides to run and get elected. Gavin Newsom probably would be the easiest to defeat because he's thoroughly ruined California, and he'll be a great poster child for progressivism. But the idea that our entire mechanisms of government could become democratic is scary. It should scare people. And the problem with that is most of them don't know it, or they would be scared. And if they do know it, they're feeling kind of helpless. Well, what do they do to fight it? They look at somebody, many 80 million voters in the last presidential election decided they want Trump. And you look at what law enforcement, what judicial branch of the government, you look at all the branches going after Trump, and the average person who's not a billionaire can't fight that. And they know they can't fight that. They wouldn't be able to take care of themselves. And so they look at that and basically say, we're going to be screwed. And we are. And so I think it's more than just people have to, get off their hiney or get involved or do something. I think most of them feel helpless. Or what's been shown is if you don't comply with the federal government, they will get you. You look at January 6th, 1,200 people in jail. They have been gotten. Not all of them. Anybody that fought with a police officer on January 6th, I would not feel bad if they got life in prison. That would not bother me. But the problem I have is, how do we know any of them? How do we know who did and who did not? How do we know that this riot wasn't engineered by the administration, by undercover agents from FBI and Homeland Security embedded in the crowd? Because they certainly knew they were on their way to Washington to protest on January 6th, the counting of the electors, certifying the Electoral College to declare Biden a winner. They knew that was coming. The president knew. He was getting intelligence reports. He knew to authorize the National Guard, 10,000 soldiers in D.C. to help preserve peace in the district, and another 10,000 on Capitol Hill to save the Capitol. And both offers were rejected by Bowser, the mayor of New York, and Nancy Pelosi. And the problem there is that there's nothing he can do once that happens. Then you also saw our beloved woke military in action during the Black Lives Matter riots, where you had guys like General Milley publicly saying, we don't care what the president says, we're not sending out the troops to preserve the peace. Flat out insubordination. Trump should have fired him immediately and didn't. And then it's not enough to cause one disaster during the Trump administration. He's got to perpetuate that during Biden with the withdrawal out of Afghanistan, where allegedly the generals, members of the Joint Chiefs, claim, maybe lying, that they told Biden, no, we've got to get our equipment out. We've got to keep the soldiers there. We've got to keep Bagram to use to evacuate our stuff, our people, and our military gear out of there. And that's, according to them, Biden ignored them. Well, I want to do it my way. And that's what we saw, the debacle when the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan. So you've got all these branches of government that seem to be like off on a do what they want.
The State Department just had hearings and they were pretty critical of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. But at the end of the day, what does it translate to or equate to? Nothing. Nothing's done. No one's held accountable, Tom. They talk about it all day long, and the rest of the American public city are scratching their heads wondering, so what will this mean? It means nothing.
There's only one person in Washington that actually gets held accountable. And you just saw that this past year. The coach of the NFL football team. He had a couple of losing seasons. Adios, pal.
No, you touched on something, Tom, about targeting, basically, which is really what happened with January 6th. For people that aren't paying attention, we have this going on, I would say, in a very offensive manner or an offensive level in New York right now as they pursue Donald Trump. And guys,
but even there, if I could stop you 1 second, you're saying that people aren't paying attention. Who would they be paying attention to? Our media, our beloved, honest, unbiased, professional media? No, many of them, that's what they're watching, especially more senior citizens that don't go on the internet and don't look for alternative news sources. Then they may be listening to Fox, or they may be listening to MSNBC or ABC or CBS, but they're going to hear the party line. They're not going to hear any really, the last time somebody was on the air spouting opinions and backing them up that was contrary to the government, the state, Tucker Carlson. Now, he had the #1 cable show. His viewership was more than all of CNN's combined practically. And yet it got to the point where, we can't have this guy putting this stuff out, putting out honest journalism. Forget about it. Fire him. And we don't care if he's our #1 guy. We don't care if our ratings drop in half. Doesn't matter. Get rid of him.
So, Tom, you brought up a really interesting point about kind of targeting or singling individuals out, as you pointed out with the FBI, Department of Justice, January 6th. And I remind everyone the same thing's going on in New York in regards to Donald Trump. This isn't about Donald Trump. It's about a mechanism they're starting to employ where they target those people that aren't favorable to them. The first thing everybody needs to understand is that we're not prosecuting violent repeat offenders in the city of New York. We're chasing Donald Trump over hush money, which was allegedly coming from or emanated from campaign funds, campaign financing, which is not under the purview of Greg. Just you and I established that. That happens to be a fact. That's not our opinion. And then we have Letitia James, where the crime has skyrocketed, according to the governor. 45% in your subways. Interestingly enough, Your shootings are down in New York City. They've gone after the guns. They've got the shootings down. But that doesn't mean the violent crime is down. The violent crime is still increasing. So keep chasing Donald Trump over crimes where there were no victim, or chase him over hush money, which is as common as the hair on our head today, and ignore the people that are putting the country or the city at peril. And it isn't just New York City. Guys, you have to understand, it's across this country. It's Memphis, it's Milwaukee, it's Minneapolis. And by the way, before I forget, I mentioned to Tom and I mentioned to whoever's listening, YouTube has a documentary called The Fall of Minneapolis. It kind of speaks for itself. You need to listen and watch this documentary and understand the direction that this country's going. We're losing this country, guys, and it's being accomplished because of a media outlet problem, credibility issue, and the fact that we have what I consider to be a rogue political element in the country today, known as Democrats. These are not Democrats of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, or Tip O'Neill. I guess the new criteria to be an elected official and lead the country is you must bartend for a couple of years, and then in your 20s, we'll make you an elected official. I'm not going to name names, ladies and gentlemen. Try to figure out who I'm talking about. And by the way, when you look at her district and you suddenly have a good take on the prostitution and the homeless and the drugs that are being dealt in Astoria, Queens, part of the borough of Queens, part of the city of New York, you'll get a better understanding as to what exactly is going on in your country. You know, we bump up against these topics on a daily basis. The purpose of this podcast is to try to get people to speak to other people and get them to listen, but to get them to understand the direction the country's going, because I personally do not believe that we will survive another 4-year administration under the Democrats. And I'm not saying that because I'm a fan of the Republicans. I've told everyone openly I have issues even with the Republicans, Tom. I don't understand why they don't pursue some of these issues, these topics. You know, this word treason is starting to pop up more and more frequently also. So I want to ask you, Tom, having been an FBI assistant director, 29 years of service, and we have treason going on in our country?
Lou, technically, no. Philosophically, yes. But, you know, for treason, you would have to have the administration helping an enemy, a declared enemy. China might be an adversary, Russia, but that we haven't declared them. Congress hasn't voted war, and we have not made them a declared enemy of the United States. So anything you do that benefits them is a treasonous act, or anything you do that weakens the United States. Because right now, you know, you can't say that the people doing this are actually committing treason. They're bringing down the United States, no question. They're weakening. Yeah, absolutely. But that's not treason. Technically, we're weakening the United States in so many different ways, whether it's World Economic Forum, whether it's the globalists, whether it's all of these issues that come up, but they're technically, I don't think, treason.
So when your FBI director, like him or not, comes out 8 months ago, 9 months ago, and makes a statement to the Senate that the southern border of the United States is a threat to your national security, and every 12 hours, we're opening up an investigation in the FBI regarding activity of China.
Yeah, and then probably 2 hours later closing it. So, you know, whatever. Like, yeah. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, Tom, I hear what you're saying. You know, no one's better suited to speak to it in that manner than you are, because you know how quick these investigations open and close. So I'll yield that point to you.
Okay, you're exactly right. Christopher Wray, director of the FBI. Let's take it back to when Comey gets fired. Comey, you know, severely weakens the Bureau. He puts people from the National Security Division into jobs where they're going to go after Trump improperly or illegally or unconstitutionally for Russiagate, Russia hoax, throwing the election. All of these accusations were several investigations, and tens of millions of dollars later, they turn out to be not true. But that was just not true. But in any event, Trump was well justified in firing Comey. Then, you know, he takes the advice of Chris Christie and puts in Christopher Wray, because Christopher Wray was working for a law firm that benefited Christie in the Bridgegate, New York, New Jersey investigation. So now Christie gets in, and, you're right. 8-10 months ago, he issues the statement that the national security of the United States is at risk because we have an open southern border. However, how many times has he had press conferences, testified on the Hill, made other public statements ever since then, dramatically increasing the rhetoric against the risk of the United States is MAGA. 80 million people voted for Trump. They're the enemy.
That doesn't negate the assessment that the
no, but it means he diminished his own statement.
Well, I think I don't agree with
so,
that necessarily.
No, it's not as important to him as he said it was,
but
because of these other things, and not just MAGA. Parents at school board meetings, that's a threat to national security. Catholics celebrating the Catholic Mass in Latin, they're fanatics, they're extremists, that's got to be a threat. So he lists off a number of these other things, and they are as big a threat in what he says as the open border. He hasn't stayed on the topic of the open border.
No, he's brought it up since then, Tom.
Yeah, but not to the same strength, let's say, that this is going to be a fact. Not to the fact that some of the other politicians are saying, we've let 10 million people across our border walk into the United States illegally, and Hamas and Hezbollah have training and selection sites in Mexico. So they can recruit thousands of people, and they can be gotaways, walk into the United States.
But Tom, to keep this in context, and I hear everything you're saying, what you're saying is 100% right. We've targeted Catholics, we've targeted parents, we've targeted the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. But I think
as threats to national security.
Agreed. But I think that people can discern that what's going on in the border, just through a little bit of common sense and logic and reason, is really a threat to the national security, further supported by the activities of migrant crime that is surging in this country. I can tell you, I have access to an individual that is involved in compiling crime stats in New York City. And the crime in January and February surged in New York City with the migrants. I know they want to commingle it into one group of individuals committing crime, but I hate to say it to you, we got to break it up as to our citizens committing crime and our non-citizens committing crime. Not to mention, there have been a rash or a number of incidents, whether it was in Virginia or Georgia, or any number of places, upstate New York, Erie County, where the county executive has said, stop sending us migrants up here. They've had numbers of sexual assaults, robberies. This latest episode, of this year at the border a few days ago. Now, I hear what you're saying, Tom, and your complaint, your observation is 100% on. It makes us suspect as to what the agenda is. I can't arbitrate that with you. But I do think when the FBI director steps up and says, the southern border of this country is a threat to your national security, that's a lot easier to bite into than them saying to you.
Okay, then who bought into it? What members of Congress picked up and said, we've got to support the director of the FBI. He really would know best. He would have the best source of intelligence.
Both sides of the aisle. No one bought into it. No one ran with this ball.
That's how much respect they have for this gentleman.
But they don't have the prerogative to feel respect or disrespect. They have a responsibility to act on his advisement. Now, are they saying to me, are the Republicans and Democrats collaboratively saying that we don't have a problem in this country with illegal people and that this border isn't a threat? Because, by the way, Tom, and I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you, but not only is Christopher Wray making these statements, but as we mentioned earlier in podcasts, 10 former senior executives of the FBI, assistant directors, have written a letter and sent it to the Congress. These guys are retired. You and I have talked to them. They're friends and colleagues of yours. We've had the good fortune to have them on the show, to be honest with you. They're not doing this because they have nothing better to do. The drums are beating. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So my next question to you is this, Tom. If this doesn't meet the criteria of treason, when we have a terrorist incident, which they're alluding to could possibly be to the magnitude of 9/11, will they then go back to the President of the United States and hold him accountable because he didn't heed the warning of his FBI director?
No.
Okay.
Next question.
No, listen, and to be very honest with you, if that's the answer, we need to revisit what constitutes treason because times have changed. And I always say, As times change, your ability to survive is predicated oftentimes on your ability to stop on a dime and change direction. So maybe we need to redefine what constitutes treason. You know, you can support the enemy, okay, not just in a direct manner, but in an indirect manner, which is what I think is going on here. How can this government as a whole, regardless of your political background, not understand that what's going on at this border is putting this country at risk? I don't care who you are. How can you hold public office? How can you be breathing the air we're breathing?
You put the country at risk when you don't even enforce street crime laws, when you don't have bail. People commit violent crime against fellow citizens, shove people off the subway platforms so they get run over by a train, or all of these other acts of violence that many of these people are doing. So what? Who's doing what about it? Does New York change its no bail laws? Do other, Illinois tries to has recently adopted New York's stupid laws. Yeah, they recently adopted it. So how smart are they? How concerned are they with street crime, infiltration of the government, illegal migrants or not? They're not. They're just not.
And you're right. The indiscriminate activity of the criminal element in all our major cities, I hate to say it, everybody, is being driven predominantly by Democratic-run cities. But this is completely,
and even maybe more important, Democratic-run prosecuting offices, district attorneys and state's attorneys. Well, but I'm thinking more mayor and city councils. But I'm saying it's the lack of prosecution that is probably the biggest threat to us. But again, you have a bunch of illegals come in from Venezuela or wherever it might be. They're not part of a regime that's at war with the United States, or we're at war with them. That's why technically it's not treason.
Well, I guess, as I want to yield to you, because I think you're better versed than I am and defining what constitutes treason, I yield to your answer based on your experience and your knowledge. But I would continue to contend that we maybe need to revisit this.
Oh, sure.
The bottom line, Tom, is this. When the shit hits the fan in this country and we have a terrorist incident and we lose, like Russia just lost in excess of 100 people, am I correct?
Yeah.
What's this president going to say about it? Especially when they find out it's rooted in people that probably came across this border, or regardless of that, are in this country and they don't belong in this country. You see, that's all what the tragic part is we're a reactive culture. But I want to know what comes after this when we have this incident that everybody's alluding to, and many credible people who are independent of politics, who are driven more by the concern and love of this country and the safety of this country. What's going to be the accountability? Are we going to step up and say this was precipitated by the fact that you neglected to heed the warning of your FBI director, who you could have replaced? Tom, so right back, here's where we're going, Tom. And this is the normal song we sing. No accountability is what you suggest.
Correct. I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting absolutely not.
I can't argue with you.
That's what I'm suggesting.
I agree 100%.
But we'll go through the motions of it. Like the old saying, when all is said and done, more is usually said than done. And that's what will happen here. If we have this next terrorist attack, it can be 5 people. It doesn't have to be thousands. A few people, and it's by an illegal migrant that come across, or a member of Hamas or Hezbollah, any of those things. We'll have a new war on terror. We'll have proposals for new power, new military action, wherever they think these guys came from, the Middle East, not going to be Mexico, but, some other country that they think this ideology was spawned and supported. Yeah, we'll have everything, like the war on terror after 9/11. Where'd that get us in the long run? In the short run, okay, we had some success, but in the long run,
I think
not really.
I think, Tom, in this instance, there are different denominators driving this discussion. And I think there are people in the media, even on the left, that have acknowledged the fact that we have a problem. We have a number of Democrat mayors, starting with Eric Adams, who's been very vocal. And his concern about it destroying New York City doesn't lend itself to the increase in crime. He's talking about economically, that the city won't be able to sustain.
And what's happened to Eric Adams in the interim?
Absolutely nothing.
No, not correct.
Oh, wait,
the FBI going after his administration.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because he criticized Biden, even indirectly.
Tom,
it's a coincidence. Yeah, okay. Well, how many other Democratic mayors in the country don't want to get caught up in their coincidence. So they still support Joe Biden as our man. He's our leader. Okay. Okay.
Tom, sometimes the critiques or the criticisms don't necessarily come from public officials. If you listen to the Denver hospital, for example, they tell you that they have $130 million of unrealized revenue from people that have visited their hospital. I think they said approximately 22,000 visits from about 5,000 migrants. So that in itself, even though it's not as directly stated as Eric Adams, is pointing the finger. And they're not the only one. What's really interesting about this conversation today is the minority community in cities like New York and Boston and Chicago are becoming very vocal about funding and accommodation that's being diverted from them to illegal immigrants in this country. But, Tom, I go back, I say to you this, we're doing them a disservice too, because at some point in time, they're festering a problem here. We could have having pushback where people start to demonstrate hostility towards individuals that they identify as having come into the country illegally. That's all there is to it. And guys, let us be clear about something. And I'm not speaking for Tom, although I will take the liberty, and if Tom can contradict me. Tom and I are not subscribing to the notion that we're not going to have a migration policy. We need one. We need migrants. I got that. Not because we need to populate America. Maybe if you made America a bit more attractive to live in, more people would be inclined who are American to have children. Because I sat on a plane next to a young lady coming here. By the way, guys, we're televised here, and you're listening to us. We're in Nashville, Tennessee, in this incredible hotel, the Marriott Gaylord. You want to come to a playland for adults and children? Come here. Very well run. There's so much to do here. You get a headache just trying to get home after you eat dinner. Which happened to Tom and I last night. But, with all that being said, Tom, we're at a crossroad in the country. This next election is going to define the future of this country and probably the future of our children. And I don't know, it troubles me because I don't know how the Democrats got so far off track. And I do have my theories about Barack Obama, who decided he was going to redefine America. I guess that might be what's going on here. I mean, I don't know what to say. He embraced the progressive movement, did he not? And I'm looking and listening to the progressives. There's so many confusing or mixed signals we get here today. You talked about Chuck Schumer a little bit ago, about him trying to basically tell another country that you need to elect another leader of that country. I wonder if that's tied to the fact that our president is taking so much heat over this thing that Israel's undertaken. And guys, before you judge Israel, until you understand or walk in their shoes, don't judge them, number one. And number two, why should anyone be surprised by any extent of response by Israel? They've never been lighthearted about anything they've done. They tell you unequivocally, you threaten us, you harm us, we'll come back and harm you 10 times more. And what people don't understand is that acts as a deterrent if people are afraid of you, which could tie us into a Donald Trump conversation at some point. Tom, we're now looking at this issue in Haiti. We've got a migrant issue at our border, southern border, right? 1,900 miles. Now we've got Haiti collapsing, and you and I were talking about it. Haiti's never had a good day. Let's be candid. I was there 40 some odd years ago. It was unstable Port-au-Prince. It looked like a cartoon show. I stayed in a place called Habitation Leclerc. We discussed this. 12-foot stone walls with barbed wire and a guard shack with armed people who come in and out of the complex. People just waking up to what Haiti's about, or the earthquake. Tom, you mentioned something else about Puerto Rico and the potential agenda of the Democrats wanting to make Puerto Rico a state. Well, you know what? You could very well be onto something there in that assessment. I think if they had their druthers, they'd probably like to make a run at it. But I remind everyone, Puerto Rico's predominantly Roman Catholic, number one. And the real fly in the ointment for Puerto Rico.
So's Joseph Biden.
Don't get me on Joseph Biden and Catholicism and a little 4-year-old little girl in Arkansas.
Okay, I'm just saying.
I hear you, Tom. I hear you. Well, listen, let's be honest. He switched horses midstream here. He's never been this radical. He was always a kind of centrist, conservative Democrat up until this administration. But I want to go back to Puerto Rico and the likelihood of them becoming a state. That means they would have to abandon all that corruption that goes on there. And I don't think there are people who are going to allow them to do that. and let's really talk to this just about failed foreign policy without diverting into another discussion. If we were smart 50, 60, 70 years ago, we would have made Puerto Rico a state back then, and Cuba. And by the way, after we fleeced the hell out of the Mexicans in 1830s, the Mexican-American War, we would have made them and offered them the opportunity to be a state. So I hear,
that was a huge discussion in Congress. 1848, we win the Mexican-American War. The whole war started because we'd already gotten Texas, the Battle of the Alamo, we lose, but in a way win, because before Santa Anna can get back to Mexico with his army, he's captured. And the American Texan army that captures him says, if you want to live, you'll let us become an independent republic. At that time, they weren't a state yet, but a republic. And so Santa Anna, of course, wanting to live, he says, okay. And they let him and his army march back a couple thousand miles back to Mexico City. And that ends that. But then what happens is then Texas, a short time later becomes a state. But the states along the Rio Grande all the way to the Pacific of New Mexico, Arizona, and California, we offered the Mexicans, we would like to buy those states from you, those provinces, that land. We'll pay you so much per acre for that. Mexico says, hell no, we're not selling it. You're not buying it. That's the end of the story. So we invade Mexico then. So in the late 1840s, we send land troops across the border into northern Mexico, and then we send naval troops, actually Army being carried by our Navy, across the Gulf of Mexico, and they land on the continent of Mexico in the Gulf of Mexico, on the isle or the land of Mexico, and then march inland to Mexico City. So by the time that whole battle is over, the Mexican-American War, the U.S. wins. Mexico eventually surrenders. And now we tell Mexico, okay, remember the offer that we made you so much money per acre? Well, we're gonna take that land now, and we'll pay you a percentage. We'll give you a little bit, just because we're so good. And we do that. So the Congress at that time was debating, we've beat Mexico. Technically, we can take all of Mexico now as a U.S. possession. And at the time, nobody realized how much oil Mexico had, how much other mineral resources in the ground they had. All they could see was this vast desert land, which appeared to be useless, even useless for a lot of agriculture. And they basically said, okay, we'll take California, New Mexico, Arizona. Mexico's, you keep Mexico. And that's what happens. Now later, oil is discovered, all of these other things. But so we could have, when we conquered Mexico, we could have took it and didn't want it. We let them keep it. We took the states on the north side of the Rio Grande.
Which also included, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, Arizona and Nevada and California.
Yeah, I said they were bigger territories, but the border states were Arizona, New Mexico, California. The territory of California went up almost to the Canadian border. But all of that, we took by paying them a small percentage, the original offer, basically just to humiliate them. And then we later invade Mexico in 1916 when Pancho Villa, one of their leading gangsters and his pistol men, are buying their weapons in Columbus, New Mexico. They go into Columbus and give the gun shop there, $10,000 to buy more guns. Woodrow Wilson, the president, says, that's it. No more guns can be sold to non-Americans. And Pancho Villa sends his people, his reps, back into Columbus. And the gun shop says, sorry, can't sell them to you and can't give you your money back. So they shoot up the town. And in the process, they kill 9 Americans, including 2 military officers from the Fort Bliss, basically, that were in the town of Columbus. Woodrow Wilson gets so mad, he dispatches the U.S. Army under the leadership of General Blackjack Pershing to go into New Mexico and hunt down Pancho Villa and kill him. And so it becomes the Mexican Expeditionary Force, leaves the United States, goes into northern Mexico, and they can't find them. They shoot up a bunch of towns, kill a bunch of Mexicans. Pancho Villa eludes them the whole time. So finally, Woodrow Wilson agrees to enter the U.S. in World War I in 1917. So he calls back Pershing. And by the way, the head of Pershing's cavalry was George Patton. At that time, cavalry was horses. So he was in charge of shoeing the horses. Later, cavalry becomes tanks in World War II. And then helicopters. Yeah, so it progresses along. But in any event, Wilson brings them back and then sends them to France. So the U.S. Army goes to France. It's in the last 100-some days of World War I. And they help basically convince Germany and everybody have an armistice. We lose 100,000 troops dead in that campaign, 1,000 a day for that 100 days. But in any event, you know, the West declares victory. They get Germany to sign the armistice on November 11th, 1918, which they do. But in any event, you know, and then we brag, we won World War I. We got Germany to quit fighting and all of that. In the meantime, Russia was having their own problems with the Bolshevik Revolution, leading to the communist takeover of creating the Soviet Union in Russia. But, you know, that was basically the problem back then. That's continued. And, you know, Mexico has not forgotten that we invaded them twice with Pershing, and then before that with, you know, right before the Civil War. So.
Well, another failed foreign policy, Tom, and, you know, as I keep talking about all the smart people that run the country, you know, this is just another example of not having some foresight or wisdom in this, you know, how there's no way they could have forecast what we're living today. That's just the bottom line. But I would just think in light of the times and the nature of these engagements that we have, it would have been kind of logical. Just take Mexico and make it a state. Kind of like in other words, Puerto Rico's been a territory for, you know, for as long as I can remember, and then some. But, you know, Tom, I go back to this conversation about Haiti because Haiti now is coming apart at the seams. Not that it was ever stable, ladies and gentlemen, because I worked there in Haiti around 1980, and they were promoting Haitian tourism, which is an oxymoron, just for the record. But now we're dealing with the potential of more people coming into this country illegally. And to the credit to the governor of Florida, DeSantis, he deployed another 250 National Guardsmen to watch our shorelines in Florida, to his credit. Oh, yeah, by the way, something else he did, there's no more squatters, because we all know squatters have become a real hot topic. New York, California, a lot of places. Can't squat in Florida anymore. They'll come in, remove you, lock you up, and prosecute you. So that'll probably arrest that situation there. You know, Tom, I'm going to take a quick break. Do a little regroup. We'll come right back, guys. This is Operation Truth. You can reach us, OperationTruthOfficial@gmail.com. Don't be shy about contacting us. And in case you haven't figured this out, Tom is also in a story. He has an immense amount of wealth, immense amount of information, a wealth of information on numerous topics. And really, the first time I bumped into it with Thomas, this discussion we had, which became very in-depth with the Kennedy assassination, which has a very strong influence on why we're living the way we're living today, the loss of the innocence of the country, bumping into this military-industrial complex. We'll be right back. Just stay with us. This is Operation Truth.
Hi, everyone. I am TJ Stone, the producer of Operation Truth, and I'm just taking a moment here to remind you to go follow us at Operation Truth Official on TikTok. And you can find us at Operation Truth Official on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We don't do as much on Instagram for reasons. On X, formerly known as Twitter, you can find us at Operation Truth and the number 7, Operation Truth 7. And always email us at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. Be a part of this conversation. Join the operation.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen. And, you know, we just were informed that we have a lot of individuals on TikTok who are following the show. I got to have a TikTok conversation with Tom, too, because we did discuss that last night over dinner, and it's a rather interesting conversation that it should really amuse you, but it probably will. But to the people that are listening, I want you to understand that the reason we're going through this exercise with this podcast is because Tom and I are gravely concerned about our young people and the overall safety and future of this country. That's why 10 former senior executives of the FBI took time out of their day they didn't have to give and wrote a letter because we're all concerned. We're concerned about you. I hate to say it this way, but I had my day in the sun, and so did Tom. Tom had a career and a half in the FBI. I know a lot of guys in the FBI. I've not bumped into anybody with levels beyond the credentials of what Tom has been able to speak to. But for those of you that are listening and watching, you have to know the motivation here. We're trying to take this country in a different direction, which is why I encourage you to tell people to listen and participate in this podcast. Tom mentioned something interesting. You know, maybe Americans feel despair or desperation. How could you not? We're going to hell in a handbasket. They just seem to do whatever they want, whenever they want. You sit there figuring out what it is you can do. What you can do is vote. And Tom and I'm at the point. I mean, Tom will tell you who to vote for. I'm going to get there at some point, you know, and I have to say one thing. When you have a brain tumor or some life-threatening condition with your heart, and the doctor doesn't have great bedside manner, but he's your go-to guy, I think you want him. And many of you probably can understand who I'm alluding to. You know, I almost want to call him Captain Crass, but I'm not going to do that. I can tell you this. Individuals such as Jamie Dimon, and most recently, Ken Langone, who owns Home Depot, and NYU Langone Hospitals in New York City, which are phenomenal medical institutions, neither one of whom are fans of Trump, have spoken the truth about this man, independent of his harshness, his lack of dignity sometimes. I hate to be critical of him or anyone in that regard. It's not my nature. But they've spoken to the truth. He put this country on a correct path. The problem people are having with Donald Trump is understanding Donald Trump. He doesn't care, guys. He doesn't really care if the Republicans really back him. This guy's hell-bent on straightening this country out. I wish more people understood that on as fundamental a level as Tom and I both do. We spoke about that as well. He's not looking to be a Republican or a Democrat. He's looking to lead this country. And to be very candid with you, as convoluted as politics are today in this country, it's hard to align with either one of them. Why would you want to take either one of their monies to just rubber stamp the crazy? And to be honest with you, they're just like we are in law enforcement. Tom and I come from a very incestuous profession. And they're the same way in D.C. They argue and banter, and then they drink, you know, brandies and smoke cigars in these beautiful historic hotels in Washington. That's the truth. I was there and witnessed it. But
yeah, Lou, I witnessed that on the Hill myself. I testified on before committees on the Hill, and you'd be in the witness seat, and, you know, a member of Congress or a senator would be grilling you. How can you say, oh, you know, it'd be very argumentative. And then two of them would start arguing with each other and all of that. And then as soon as the gavel fell that the hearing was over, hey, where are we going to lunch? You know, buddy. And so it was all a play acting of that they were adversarial, that they were fighting against this. And, you know, we see that now. We see that with...
They're not serving the country, Tom, is really what's simple to state. Neither one of the parties, you know, what they have to do is start to not put aside your differences, but to manage your differences differently. This word compromise has totally left the conversation here. Civility and decency, the way we engage one another, has totally left this conversation. And by the way, these are all concepts we're trying to teach our children to embrace, and the big people are acting out in a way that's in complete contradiction to what we're teaching. This exchange of rhetoric. And let's go right back to the media, Tom, because we don't speak about the media enough. The media is more powerful than the government, because the media can decide, as we're witnessing on a daily basis, what they choose to report, this selective reporting. Where's the oversight? You know, they keyed two words, dictator, where Trump made an offhanded comment about, yeah, I'm going to be a dictator. Day one, I'm going to be a dictator. That's the only day. I'm going to shut down the border. We're going to open up the pipeline. Then he got into this discussion about the automotive industry in China, manufacturing vehicles in Mexico, and how if they don't put the halt on this, if they flood this country with their cars, it'll cause a bloodbath in our auto industry. You listen to the lack of responsibility and the way that was conveyed redundantly through MSNBC, CNN, CNBC. Where's the oversight with this group? You know, and I'm having a hard time understanding that the First Amendment of the Constitution allows you, as a licensed party, right? The FCC licenses this, that you're allowed to knowingly disseminate or spin information to intentionally mislead the American public. Where did we ever embrace this concept? Guys, while we're on it, where did we ever get the idea that the founding fathers believed we were going to let every person from no matter where they came from on the planet under one roof, and we were going to be able to satiate your appetites? Where did these bizarre notions come from? We are a Western European civilization-based country. Look at our architecture. And that doesn't subscribe to the notion that people can't come to this country from other places of origin. You can. But guys, this is like the cuckoo left the clock here. If you listen to who's coming across the border, 190 countries. That can be ethnic, religious, cultural, and lifestyle. We can't get two neighbors to agree or get along together on a block, on a street in New York. What are you talking about? Where did you get this warped idea that the founding fathers, when they created the country, were going like, yes, and one day we'll have everybody from all over the world come here, and everybody's going to camp out under this umbrella called America, and we're going to get along, and everything's going to be hunky-dory, which is a big part of what's driving this, coupled with the discussion of this lack of assimilation. We're bringing in 15 million illegal immigrants into this country. Now, we already have the minority community, the blacks and Latinos. We haven't really assimilated them. We took the indigenous people, we compartmentalized, we put them on reservations. I guess that was assimilation. Let's let 15 more million people in. We can't house, feed, or clothe, or educate. Don't get me on the education process in New York City, because just for the record, guys, try enrolling your children into school without inoculation. See how it works. Well, they put 25,000 plus children in the public school system in New York City that were not inoculated. But to go back to this discussion in where I was driving this thing, where did this idea come from that the founding fathers, when the population of the country was projected to be about 2.5 million people, would one day go like, yeah, we're going to have 360 million plus people in the country, which we do conservatively. This whole discussion, guys, about population of country, number of migrants, and guns in the country, we have no idea on any one of these topics. That's just a simple fact, and I can speak to you if you so choose, I do so. We have no idea how many migrants have come into this country. We keep counting them coming across the southern border. We neglect to remind you how many people stay past their visas, which is always the #1 way people violated our immigration laws. Or suddenly, we're just glossing over this whole issue of the northern border with states like Vermont and Maine. How many people have come in? That's right. Let's listen to the people from Border Patrol tell you about the unmonitored sectors along our southern border. There is no monitoring. Or our gotaways, which are pushing 2 million people. These are people we picked up through technology, but had no encounters. Guys, this is your country. For everybody listening, if you're wondering why we're doing this, pay attention to these conversations. We're trying to guide us into another path of travel. Tom and I don't have enough time to be elected officials and lead this country. That's just a simple dynamic. But I will say this. This man I'm sitting across the table from right now could straighten out the FBI in about 15 minutes. They have gone awry because they've surrendered their integrity, their honor, and their trustworthiness for political reason. I know, Tom, this is something near and dear to your heart. And I even hate bringing it up because I know how this upsets you after dedicating 29 years of your life protecting this country in an unbiased, unpolitical manner. And all we do today is bump into the media and elected officials that want to politicize your former organization. Am I correct?
Correct.
Now, let me ask you this, though. Did Trump try it also, Tom, in your opinion?
No.
He did. How about just so we can go over this? Remember the exchange?
No, and I think in a way, Trump, he and Bill Barr were intimidated into not even, having anything to do with the FBI or which directions their policy should go or which cases they should pursue. And I think that, he is the commander in chief. He is the leader of the executive branch. The FBI is a member of the executive branch and should be under the leadership, in a way, of the president of the United States. Now, we've gone, under the current administration with Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, and then, of course, Biden. I don't know, Biden and all of these prosecutions, all of these efforts to go after not just Trump, but Trump supporters. And you've had that over and over again. And that's why I was saying earlier that, when Ray talked about the open border, okay, he said what was true, but he has made many more serious speeches about the 80 million people that vote for Trump are a threat to U.S. national security. White supremacy, threat. MAGA, a threat. All of that, these are political movements within the United States that are popular because the people see that they are doing good for the future of the, not just the FBI, but other federal agencies and the U.S. government. And, Ray and Biden and Merrick Garland, they don't want to hear any of that. They want to go after these. They want to go after parents who protest at school boards, or Catholics that celebrate Mass in Latin, of all things. Obvious terrorist organizations do their business in Latin. So you have these kind of things going on in the government, persecuting a large number of people in the United States that supported Trump, or even if they didn't support Trump, at least supported, many of these conservative ideals. And they go after him, and they've been going after him.
And that was the impetus to Jamie Dimon's comment and assessment of Trump. The lead-in was truth be told, and then mentioned that he was right on the borders of immigration, right on China, right on NATO, right on the energy sector, right on. But the thing that's so interesting now is that if you voted for Trump, they automatically want to brand you as being a MAGA. I have a very simple, open-ended question. What's wrong with wanting to make America great? And I hate to say this to Donald Trump, and I hate to say this, period, but I'm going to. I'm not so sure America was really ever great. I think we've been striving to be great. This isn't about making America great again. I'm trying to find when the again was, guys, because we've made so many mistakes, which is just part of the journey, Tom. You know what I'm talking about. Every civilization's done that. We made a mistake with allowing slavery in the country. We ethnically cleansed the indigenous people. We've made mistakes. The key is to learn the mistake, from the mistake, and forge forward. And guys, all of those listening to this podcast, that's what we want you to come away with. In law enforcement, there's an interesting expression. It's never the crime, it's the cover-up. I don't care. People who represent my company, and I have probably the most prestigious executive protection company in the country, and I can prove that to you based on reputation. My guys, girls make mistakes all the time. If they're not done with malice, they're just done innocently, you learn from the mistake, you don't beat us over the head with it, and you go forward. And that's what we need to do here. We need to almost, in a sense, start over, which could lend itself to a notion maybe the founding fathers had about revolution. Every now and then you need a revolution to get back to the base of where you belong and then to go forward again. I don't know what the elected officials who live in a bubble or a cocoon don't understand about this country. I sometimes wonder, are they trying to force us into another civil war? Where is it they think this is all going to end up, Tom? Because, as we all know, people are just trying to get along and get through their day. Their kids, their families, whatever it is, pay your bills. But at some point, the bow will break. Not for anything, but the American taxpayer today is paying taxes so we can fund this proxy war in the Ukraine at $113 billion. And we're suggesting another $61 billion for a total of $174 billion. And that's not the end of the billions. Now we're supporting Israel, $17 billion. And you and I had a laugh last night over the $300 million they supposedly gave to Haiti. Who did they give it to in Haiti that isn't corrupt, who's in power?
Barbecue.
There you go. I guess that's going to allow them to have more barbecues, is all I could surmise. But guys, you have to listen to what we're talking about. It goes into this conversation about us taking care of us first. Guys, if you're listening to us speak, we're trying to show you the way to take care of our own people first. And that's by having an intelligent border. That's by having better foreign policies. That's by funding people in our country like the homeless, the mentally ill, our veterans, our children's school safety, right? Any number of demographics that are suffering in this country because the government's preoccupied with either making friends of or fighting proxy wars. And let me clear something else up about Donald Trump, and I take exception to them misrepresenting what he says. And I'm not telling you I support just hear me out. Trump made a comment when he was in office to NATO, am I right, Tom, about disproportionate spending of support for the United States.
Pay your dues.
Pay what you should pay. Correct. We're paying money to protect you from a country that you're engaged in commerce with. I think he was alluding to Germany and Russia at the time.
No, actually, almost more than 90% of the countries were paying less than what they were required, which was 2% of their GDP. And it did include Germany, the richest country and leader of Europe, but included them.
Yeah, but so Tom, if we just hear what Trump was saying, pay your share. Why are we disproportionately committed? Ladies and gentlemen, whether you're paying attention to this or not, to these going on potentially hundreds of billions of dollars in the Ukraine, we're not suggesting we not support the Ukraine. We're saying we do it proportionally, correct, Tom? That's really what we're saying here. And all of a sudden, the media is telling you he wants to destroy NATO. No, he wants NATO to step up to the plate. I've said this before, guys, on this podcast. I say it again. If you're listening to me, listen to this. 32 NATO nations. I believe most recently Sweden is now part of NATO. If they're not, then it's 31. But either 29 or
Sweden and Finland both recently joined.
They're both in 32 nations. 30 of them are on the continent of Europe. They have skin in this game more than we do. Contrary to what Nikki Haley said in a debate with Ramaswamy, that the Ukraine was a cornerstone for this country, which is that is an alarming statement. And Tom and I spoke last night over dinner, and this is really an interesting observation that I made. I think this woman is probably the most electable political official, both sides of the aisle today. But you better watch out with this young lady because she's tied to military-industrial complex, number one. And that's why she came out with the statement about cornerstone to the United States. No, they're a cornerstone to Europe. And Tom has spoken to you before, and I won't speak for Tom. Tom will explain to you why Russia's got their ass in the air over this thing, and it has to do with proximity of Ukraine, Russia, and that nation becoming a NATO nation. Am I correct?
That's exactly what caused this whole thing. When people started saying NATO has to go into Ukraine, and Putin's people and Zelensky's people at the time, right before the war started a little over 2 years ago, they had a negotiation. They met in Islamabad, Turkey, and they discussed that and agreed that NATO will not take over in Ukraine. Ukraine will be neutral, period. Many of the Ukrainians are ethnically tied to many of the Russians, especially in the eastern provinces, Donbass region. And NATO and Zelensky's people agreed. All right, we're going to stay neutral. We're not going to have NATO bringing its U.S. weaponry to the border with Russia so that their missiles could strike Moscow in 8 minutes or less. And there are other industrial sites less than that.
The same concern we had, by the way, with Cuba, right?
Cuban Missile Crisis. And in those days, it was like an hour for a missile to actually hit somewhere in the U.S. But
we have hypersonic. Am I correct, Tom?
No, these would just be straight missiles. The missiles that they were going to provide Ukraine that NATO have aren't even hypersonic. They're just regular garden variety high power missiles. And they're so close to Moscow, a couple hundred miles, that it's literally 8-10 minutes to arrive there. So basically, they reached a negotiated agreement, Russia, that Ukraine will stay neutral, not join NATO. And at the time, NATO didn't want them. Nobody was talking about, really, Ukraine joining. Well, they're so corrupt. They didn't want anything to do with them. They didn't want them stealing their money when they could steal our money.
Has that changed, Tom?
No.
That's my point. So, guys, if you follow this conversation, Tom is basically explaining to you that corruption was a big part of as to why the Ukraine would never become part of NATO. And by the way, this is where we're funneling money into that we have no idea where it's going, although Tom will tell you where some of it's going to.
Well, it's a result of corruption because, the Ukrainians gave Biden and the Biden family and the Biden LLC so many millions of dollars that now they've got Biden over a barrel. They believe that they've recorded those conversations with Joe 3 or 4 on the phone with him and many, many, many more with Hunter Biden. And so the deal from Biden's perspective is as close as you can have a perspective that they have him over a barrel. They've corrupted him. That's what corruption does. You give a crooked politician crooked money, and now you threaten, I'm going to expose you if you don't do what I want and give me the benefits that I'm paying you for. And that's what we have with Ukraine. So Ukraine says, give us money. Biden, how much do you want?
So I want to just synopsize this, guys, because we're going to go to a break. If you're hearing what Tom's saying, the Ukraine was corrupt before, and they're still corrupt now. And somehow this country has seen fit to give it so far $113 billion that we really can't tell you who got their hands on that money. And this is not the first time at the rodeo, Tom. We had the same thing happen in the Middle East. Guys, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back to it. Continue this conversation about the Ukraine, because it translates once again to some of the misguided foreign policies of this country and the fact that we're just exploiting the American public and our young people. We'll be right back, guys. This is Operation Truth. You can reach us at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. Stay with us, guys. We'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. I am TJ Stone, the producer of Operation Truth, and I'm just taking a moment here to remind you to go follow us at Operation Truth Official on TikTok. And you can find us at Operation Truth Official on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We don't do as much on Instagram for reasons. On X, formerly known as Twitter, you can find us at Operation Truth and the number 7, Operation Truth 7. And always email us at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. Be a part of this conversation. Join the operation.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen. We let off with this discussion about the Ukraine, the corruption then, now, and the fact that we're funneling, coming up on a couple of $100 billion in money, and you wonder where it's going. So go ahead, Tom. You want to make another point?
Well, before I make the point of where it's going, we could pretty much figure out by the luxury houses that Zelensky's building, senior generals are building, senior government officials in the Mediterranean, in the south of Florida, in Cyprus, in Italy, you name it. But anyway, I was starting to say that Russia, Putin's negotiators and Zelensky's negotiators had come to an agreement. They had a long agreement of how they were going to stay out of NATO, stay neutral, how they were going to make the considerations of the land in the eastern Ukrainian provinces. And then what happens is Biden dispatches Boris Johnson, the prime minister of the United Kingdom at the time, to go to Kiev and tell Zelensky, no deal with the Russians, no peace treaty, no agreement to stay out of NATO, nothing. You tell them no, and in exchange, we will give you all the weaponry you're ever going to need to defeat Russia. And Biden's making speeches that we want Putin out of office. We want regime change in Russia. We want to conquer Russia. We want to defeat Russia using Ukraine and their hundreds of thousands of soldiers as a proxy. So that was what the agreement was, that it was destroyed by us, the rest of NATO, with Boris Johnson doing the talking in Kiev, and the deal's off.
And that was, Tom, let just ask this question. And the sole purpose of that position, that policy, was because they thought they were going to destroy Russia?
Well, they said that. They said, Ukraine, we're going to give you all the money, everything you need, except
game would be
destroy Putin's administration and destroy Russia. Now, at that time, so Zelensky says absolutely no deal. We're not going to stay neutral. We're going to, do what we want to do. And if if the NATO wants to come in and turn us into a NATO country, so be it. But that was a big part of that deal, was that Ukraine's going to do what it wants. Now, at the same time, we have Zelensky, being lobbied in Kiev by the UK on behalf of NATO and the US. We have Victoria Nuland, who has now just allegedly left the government a couple of weeks ago, but she's the architect of the coup in Ukraine in 2014 that throws out their elected president and begins putting in the stooges that we want, we the United States. And so now you have Victoria Nuland in the middle of all of that kind of stuff. And so basically, we convinced Zelensky, we're going to give you all this military gear. NATO's going to give you all this gear, all of this money, all of that, so that you will attack Russia and bring about regime change in Russia. And we're going to support you as long as it takes. Now, later in the last few months, that's changed to as long as we can. So it's pretty clear that we're on the verge, I think, of doing with the Ukraine what we did with Vietnam. We support Vietnam militarily, well, with advisors for many years, but starting in 1964, the year after Kennedy's assassination, we countermand. Johnson issues a new order countermanding Kennedy's order to pull all our people out of Vietnam. We're not going into Vietnam. Instead, the agreement is Johnson gets in, he rescinds Kennedy's order, issues a new one of his own, the advisors stay, and we're going to send troops. And then at that time, then Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, General Westmoreland, they start talking about how many troops it will take to defeat the communists in Vietnam. The communists were in the north, South Vietnam, allegedly a democracy. We're going to support the South to defeat the communists. And that's what we decide. We're going to do that. So for 64 to 75, 11 years, we're sending money, people. 58,000 of our young military officers get killed in Vietnam. Another several 100,000 lose limbs and are permanently disabled for life. It's estimated that the Vietnamese had 2 million of their citizens in the South killed, in the crossfire of the war with the U.S. against the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army. So all of that goes on. By 1975, we finally realized, actually by 68, we realized we're not going to win. That's when the most respected journalist in the United States, Walter Cronkite, CBS News, he goes to Vietnam to do his own inspection, talk to the generals, talk to the mid-level military officers, talk to the Vietnamese. They convince him, especially with the Tet Offensive, which was a big insurgency, January 1968. So Cronkite goes on the air, issues a number of statements on CBS News saying, it's pretty clear to this reporter, we're not going to win in Vietnam. Now, we might tie, that we might, fight to a draw, or they might win, but we're not going to win.
But Tom, we never fight to win.
No, but he says it out loud to the American people, and he's the most singular trusted journalist in the United States. So he comes back. He's putting these statements on the air remotely from Vietnam. And then when he comes back to CBS News headquarters in New York City, in March 19th, 1968, Lyndon Johnson is running for re-election as president of the United States. He's able to run one more time, 1968. And he watches these broadcasts by Cronkite, and in a recorded conversation on his recording system in the Oval Office, he's calling a couple of his senior advisors and senators that were close friends and tells them, if we've lost Cronkite, we've lost the war. That's how he puts it. And then he decides that week, basically, to make his fateful announcement, I will not seek and I will not accept the nomination for president of the United States, by my party. So he drops out. Now the race is going to be between Hubert Humphrey as vice president, Eugene McCarthy, and Bobby Kennedy. And in first week in California, you have the primary in California, and Kennedy wins. And now he may pick up momentum to enable him to defeat for the nomination Hubert Humphrey and Eugene McCarthy. And so Kennedy, in his fateful speech that night, says, we won here, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. And then they take the shortcut through the kitchen, he's assassinated. So, but Johnson still does not run, and Hubert Humphrey then becomes president.
Well, what's
the Democratic candidate, defeated by Nixon.
What's interesting, Tom, is that, we're still continuing to do business the same way we did 50 years ago, 60 years ago. It's like, and the sad part about it is the American public doesn't really understand what drives this country. It's this military industrial.
No, and the statements made by that complex and by the administration is that, well, we gave them everything, they needed to win, and they didn't win. So basically saying it's their fault, we're out of here. And then we're boarding the helicopters, leading off the embassy in Saigon, April 1975. Taking the people to the ships. When they run out of room on the aircraft carriers, they shove our helicopters into the ocean to make room for more people. So, but anyway, we're out. Nixon becomes president, and then we go from there. But every war since then is basically the same thing. We don't fight, like you say, we don't fight to win.
What was the last war? Tom, you and I agree. It's the last time. But Tom, what you're listening to, guys, is that we're going down the same path of travel with the Ukraine.
Absolutely.
We're going to come in and say, we gave you it all, and you guys dropped the ball.
Exactly. But how could you do this with all our best equipment and everything we gave you, and you still lost? Shame on you.
But the American taxpayer has to know, Tom, is very soon we're going to be pushing on $200 billion of money that could be better spent in our country, on our people. And that's the real crime of this all. And I go back and say to everyone, it's not that we don't want to support the Ukraine, but we need to do it proportionately. And as you pointed out, Tom, the percentage of contribution by the other NATO nations is shameful and embarrassing. And to tie this into where I started this comment.
Well, in fairness to NATO, they're not a NATO country anyway. They are a fellow European country.
Yeah, but I'm talking
but still,
the NATO nations should be embarrassed that they're not kicking in for something that directly impacts their own safety. But guys, this started out with a conversation about, lowballing Donald Trump because he went after NATO during his administration, and he's done it again. Not suggesting that, although I have to say this comment about Russia can do whatever the hell they want, that's where he has to stop talking. Like, he has some good ideas, Tom, and then you say something a little bit to the asinine. We don't want to encourage Putin or any.
Yeah, it was a dumb thing to say. Yeah. True, but dumb.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But you also know something's better left unsaid. But the bottom line, guys, is that he's not abandoning NATO. He's not suggesting that. But I think he takes exception, as we all should, to the fact that we disproportionately support this endeavor. And again, guys, it's at your expense. If you're listening to the show, you're paying for this craziness here. And at some point in time, we need to pull our horns in, make our people first. And while we're doing that, guys, we've got to completely realign the structure of this country, starting with our media, who are our message carriers that we spoke about earlier. They have your optic and your narrative in their hands. They're even more powerful than the government, because you can jump up and down about an elected official. If they don't want to get your message out, your message isn't getting out. You've got to understand the scope of this problem. Guys, we're going to wrap for today. There's so much more to talk about. This issue with the borders. And I'll tell you, a few episodes ago, Tom brought to my attention that someone had corresponded to him about how much we talk about the borders. There's nothing more important today going on in this country than the borders. Your economy is critically important. In fact, not to continue this conversation today, guys, but as they're telling you, things are getting better. The price of gasoline is starting to go through the roof again. I don't know what planet they're living on in Washington, D.C. I don't know how they have the courage to stand there and bold-faced lie to you, telling you how things are better when your food prices have not gone down, they're going up. Your price of gasoline is going up, hasn't gone down. And by the way, there's this whole lie about the energy sector. And we didn't have an opportunity to talk about it today, but if you listen to prior podcasts, and I keep bringing up this word nuclear, you're going to find this interesting. Mr. Gates just came out and started talking about constructing these state-of-the-art nuclear power plants. Guys, we're going to wrap it today. This has been Operation Truth. For everyone listening, we really appreciate it. We want you to understand what's driving this. We're trying to take this country in a different direction. We're hoping to broaden our platform, maybe have our own network where you'll have an exception to something other than this crazy shit you listen to from Fox and MSNBC and CNN, all of which is driven by an agenda. So we're clear, you are our agenda. That's it. You're our agenda, our young people. And we have to apologize to you at some point for creating this wacky-ass world you're living in. It's been Operation Truth. I thank you as always, Tom.
Thank you, Lou.
Brilliant, my friend, historian, all of the above. We'll see you next time.